Welcome to West Film. We bring you the best movie recaps, reviews, ending explained videos, and hidden details from your favorite films. If you love great movies, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now grab some popcorn, and let's jump into today's movie. Looking back today, some of the effects clearly reflect the technology available in the early 2000s. But the overall transformation remains one of the movie's most recognizable achievements. Without believable makeup, the entire premise would have been much harder for audiences to accept, even within the film's exaggerated reality. Music plays an important role as well. Rather than sitting quietly in the background, the soundtrack helps shape the film's energetic personality. Many of the songs instantly place the audience in that early 2000s atmosphere, giving the movie a nostalgic charm that has only grown stronger over time. Watching it today almost feels like revisiting a different era of comedy, back when studios were more willing to take risks on outrageous concepts instead of relying so heavily on established franchises. That sense of nostalgia is one reason the film keeps finding new viewers years after its original release. From a production standpoint, White Chicks was a fairly ambitious comedy released in 2004 by Sony Pictures through Revolution Studios, with a reported production budget of around $37 million. For a comedy, that was a significant investment, especially given the extensive makeup work, costumes, stunt sequences, and large-scale production involved. At the worldwide box office, the film earned over $110 million, making it a commercial success despite mixed critical reviews. That gap between critics and audiences is one of the most interesting parts of the movie's history, since it shows that audience enjoyment doesn't always line up with professional reviews. Looking back now, it's easy to understand why White Chicks has stayed part of comedy conversations for more than 2 decades. It isn't trying to be subtle, realistic, or emotionally complex. Its goal is simple: entertain the audience with bold performances, exaggerated situations, and non-stop energy. Whether every joke lands will always come down to personal taste, but the film's willingness to fully embrace its outrageous premise is something I genuinely admire. In a genre where hesitation can ruin even the funniest ideas, White Chicks never hesitates for a second, and that fearless attitude becomes one of its greatest strengths. One thing that stood out to me during this rewatch is how much the movie depends on confidence rather than realism. Plenty of comedies have ridiculous premises, but they often spend too much time trying to explain why those premises make sense. White Chicks takes the opposite approach. It knows the audience already understands the setup is impossible, so instead of offering long explanations, it simply moves forward and focuses on making every situation as entertaining as possible. That decision keeps the momentum alive, because the film never gets sidetracked trying to justify its own absurdity. It trusts the audience to accept its world, and surprisingly, that trust pays off. The performances by Shawn and Marlon Wayans deserve even more appreciation when you consider how physically demanding these roles must have been. Wearing heavy prosthetics for long filming days is already challenging, but they also had to deliver energetic comedy while staying fully in character. Physical humor only works when an actor is completely committed, and both of them throw themselves into every scene without ever looking uncomfortable or hesitant. Whether they're reacting with exaggerated expressions, performing awkward movements, or firing off fast-paced dialogue, they maintain the same level of energy throughout the movie. That consistency is one of the biggest reasons the comedy never feels lazy. Another thing I appreciated was the film's grasp of visual comedy. Some jokes don't even need dialogue to work. A simple facial expression, an unexpected reaction, or an exaggerated movement often lands funnier than a long exchange of lines. The Wayans brothers have always been comfortable with physical comedy, and this movie gives them countless chances to show off that skill. Even when you can see a joke coming, the timing often makes it work anyway. because the delivery feels spontaneous rather than rehearsed. The supporting cast also deserves recognition, because a concept like this only works if everyone plays it straight. Terry Crews is probably the standout supporting performer. His commitment to the role creates some of the movie's most memorable moments. What makes his performance so effective is that he never seems to be trying too hard to be funny. Instead, he fully believes in every situation, letting the comedy grow naturally out of his reactions. Looking back today, it's easy to see why so many viewers still bring up his scenes whenever the movie comes up. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the supporting cast also help build a believable environment within the movie's exaggerated reality. Comedy often depends on reactions, and these actors clearly understand that. Instead of constantly trying to steal attention, they support the leads by responding naturally to increasingly ridiculous situations. That teamwork makes the humor feel much smoother, because everyone appears to be playing the same game rather than competing for laughs. From a directing standpoint, Keenan Ivory Wayans deserves credit for keeping up a fast rhythm. Comedy can lose its impact if scenes overstay their welcome, but White Chicks rarely lets that happen. Conversations move quickly, visual jokes come one after another, and the film keeps introducing fresh situations before the previous joke starts to feel stale. Even if not every joke lands for every viewer, the pacing gives the audience very little time to lose interest, since something new is always around the corner. The editing quietly supports that pace as well. Comedy is all about timing, and editing plays a much bigger role in that than many people realize. Holding a reaction shot a beat too long, or cutting away too early, can completely change whether a joke works. Watching the film again, I noticed how carefully many scenes are assembled, and the editors clearly know when to stay on an actor's face, when to switch perspectives, and when to let silence become part of the joke. Those choices aren't always obvious while you're watching, but they contribute heavily to the movie's overall rhythm. The costume department also deserves recognition. Beyond the impressive makeup, the wardrobe helps sell each character's personality. Every outfit reflects the glamorous lifestyle the movie is parodying, and the attention to detail adds another layer to the comedy. Bright colors, designer-inspired fashion, accessories, and hairstyles all work together to create an exaggerated version of early 2000s celebrity culture. Looking at those costumes today feels almost like opening a time capsule, which adds an extra layer of nostalgia for modern audiences. Another reason the film keeps attracting viewers is that it doesn't rely solely on references tied to 2004. While there are certainly moments rooted in the culture of that time, much of the humor comes from personality clashes, misunderstandings, awkward situations, and exaggerated confidence are the kind of jokes that tend to hold up much longer because they don't depend on one specific trend. That's probably why younger audiences who discover the movie years later can still enjoy many of its funniest moments without needing to catch every early 2000s reference. Commercially, White Chicks proved that word of mouth can be more powerful than critical reception. Even though many professional reviewers were unimpressed when the movie first premiered, audiences kept buying tickets, recommending it to friends, and eventually turned it into one of the most recognizable comedies of its generation. That's something we see fairly often with comedy films. Humor is deeply personal, and audience reactions don't always match review scores. In this case, viewers clearly had the final say, and the movie's lasting popularity speaks louder than its original reviews. After spending more time with the film, I think one of its greatest achievements is that it never pretends to be smarter than it is. It knows exactly what kind of comedy it's making and commits to that style without apology. That honesty gives the movie a unique charm. It isn't chasing awards or trying to impress critics with complicated storytelling. Its only mission is to entertain for a couple of hours, and thanks to the dedication of its cast, energetic direction, memorable supporting performances, and fearless sense of humor, It pulls that off far more often than many people expected when it was first released. The more I watch White Chicks, the clearer one thing becomes: the movie understands that comedy isn't only about telling jokes, it's about creating memorable personalities that people enjoy spending time with. Plenty of comedies get a laugh once but become forgettable a few months later because the characters never leave a lasting impression. Here, even people who haven't seen the movie in years can still remember the personalities, the exaggerated behavior, and the interplay between the cast. That's a sign the filmmakers created characters who are entertaining beyond a single punchline. Shawn and Marlon Wayans deserve another round of credit, because their performances require far more control than they appear to at first glance. Comedy often looks effortless when it's done well, but behind every funny moment is careful timing, rehearsal, and confidence. They have to balance exaggerated expressions with believable reactions, making sure the humor never feels completely random. Watching them closely, you can tell they understand exactly how much energy each scene needs, when to go completely over the top and when a smaller reaction will actually land funnier. That control keeps the comedy from becoming exhausting, even though the movie rarely slows down. One detail I appreciated much more this time around is how the film builds comedy through awkward social situations instead of leaning only on verbal jokes. Many of the funniest moments happen because characters are forced into uncomfortable circumstances where they have to keep pretending everything is normal. Those situations naturally create tension, and the audience already senses something is eventually going to go wrong. That anticipation becomes part of the humor even before anything happens. Viewers are already smiling because they can feel the chaos getting closer. It's a simple storytelling technique, but it's used effectively throughout the movie. The chemistry between the leads and the supporting cast also keeps improving as the movie moves forward. Good comedy isn't just about delivering funny lines, it's also about how different personalities bounce off one another. Every supporting character reacts differently to the increasingly ridiculous situations, which keeps the movie from feeling repetitive. Some respond with complete confidence, others with confusion, others with exaggerated enthusiasm, and that variety keeps conversations fresh, since each interaction produces a slightly different kind of humor. Terry Crews once again proves why he became one of the movie's biggest highlights. His performance is memorable because he commits completely without ever seeming self-conscious. A lot of actors would probably play these scenes with a wink toward the audience, all but admitting the situation is ridiculous. Terry Crews never does that. He behaves as though everything happening around him is perfectly reasonable, and that complete sincerity makes his scenes significantly funnier. It's a reminder that the funniest performances often come from actors who take absurd situations completely seriously. Visually, the movie still holds together surprisingly well for a comedy released in 2004. No one watches White Chicks expecting groundbreaking visual effects, but the production values are stronger than many people remember. The sets, lighting, costumes, and makeup all work together to create a polished presentation that supports the film's playful tone. Nothing feels cheap or rushed. Even when the premise asks the audience to accept something impossible, the production itself looks professional enough to help sell the illusion. The cinematography isn't flashy, and I actually think that's the right call. Comedy rarely benefits from overly complicated camera work, since audiences need to focus on the performances. The camera usually stays exactly where it needs to be, letting the actors' expressions and physical comedy remain the center of attention. Instead of distracting viewers with unnecessary visual tricks, the cinematography quietly supports the humor by making sure every important reaction is easy to see. It's simple filmmaking, but it's effective filmmaking. Something else worth mentioning is how well the movie captures the atmosphere of the early 2000s. The fashion, music, technology, and celebrity culture all reflect that specific period, giving the film a nostalgic charm that grows stronger with time. Watching it today feels almost like stepping back into a completely different era of Hollywood comedy. Rather than hurting the movie, that nostalgia has become one of its biggest strengths. So many viewers return to White Chicks not only because it's funny, but also because it reminds them of when they first watched it. Behind the scenes, the makeup department reportedly spent several hours every day transforming Shawn and Marlon Wayans into their on-screen appearances. That process demanded incredible patience from both actors, especially since they still had to perform energetic comedy after sitting through lengthy makeup sessions. It's one of those production details audiences don't usually think about while watching, but it adds another layer of appreciation once you realize how much work went into making the central concept believable enough for the comedy to succeed. One reason White Chicks has remained popular for so long is that it became incredibly rewatchable. Many comedies depend entirely on surprise, meaning the jokes lose their impact once you already know what's coming. This film works a little differently even after multiple viewings. The performances, reactions, and comedic timing remain entertaining, because much of the humor comes from delivery rather than shock value. That's why so many fans keep revisiting it years later. They already know what's going to happen, but they still enjoy watching how the actors bring each moment to life. Looking back at everything the movie has accomplished, I think its greatest strength is confidence. It never apologizes for its unusual concept, never slows down to defend its own logic, and never seems worried about whether every single viewer will get its style of humor. Instead, it fully commits to being bold, energetic, and unapologetically silly. That fearless approach won't appeal to everyone, but for the audience willing to embrace the movie's exaggerated world, it creates an experience that stays entertaining long after the credits roll. Sometimes confidence is the difference between a comedy that's quickly forgotten and one that keeps making people laugh decades later, and White Chicks is a perfect example of that idea. One of the things I kept thinking about during this rewatch was how fearless the movie is. A lot of modern comedies seem worried about whether every joke will work for every viewer, so they often play it safe. This film does the exact opposite. From the opening act onward, it throws itself into every ridiculous idea without hesitation. That doesn't mean every joke is perfect, but it does give the movie a unique personality. Even when a gag doesn't fully land, you can still appreciate the confidence behind it, because the filmmakers never look uncertain about the kind of experience they're trying to create. The screenplay deserves more credit than it usually gets. On the surface, the story looks incredibly simple, but keeping an outrageous comedy entertaining for a full feature-length runtime isn't easy. The writers constantly introduce fresh situations, new misunderstandings, and different kinds of humor, so the movie rarely feels like it's repeating the same joke over and over. Instead of relying on one comedic formula, it mixes physical comedy, awkward conversations, exaggerated reactions, visual gags, and social satire. That variety keeps the energy alive and keeps the film from becoming predictable. Shawn and Marlon Wayans continue carrying the movie with performances that require impressive commitment. It's easy to laugh at the costumes and makeup, but what really sells the illusion is the confidence with which they perform. They don't act like people pretending to be someone else. They fully commit to every conversation, every movement, and every reaction. That level of dedication lets the audience temporarily forget how unrealistic the premise actually is. Comedy often depends on actors believing in the world they're creating, and that's exactly what happens here. Another detail I appreciated is how naturally the movie balances fast-paced comedy with quieter moments. While most people remember White Chicks for its loud, over-the-top scenes, there are also smaller interactions that give the characters room to breathe. Those moments matter, because non-stop comedy can become exhausting if the audience never gets a chance to reset. By occasionally slowing the pace, The movie makes the bigger comedic moments hit even harder when they arrive. The supporting cast keeps making a major contribution. Terry Crews remains one of the film's standout performers, but he's far from the only memorable presence. Busy Phillips and Jaime King bring convincing confidence to their roles, while Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the ensemble each add their own personality to the film's exaggerated world. None of them seem embarrassed by the material. Everyone commits to the same playful tone, and that's one of the biggest reasons the movie works as well as it does. Comedy usually falls apart when performers approach it differently, but this cast feels completely united. Looking at the technical side of the production, the makeup effects remain one of the movie's biggest achievements. Even today, it's easy to imagine how much planning and preparation went into those transformations. The prosthetics had to look convincing enough for the audience to accept the central concept while still giving the actors enough freedom to express themselves. Facial expressions are essential in comedy, so limiting that movement would have hurt countless jokes. The makeup artists managed to strike a balance that supported both the visual transformation and the performances, which was no small accomplishment. The soundtrack also deserves another mention, because it captures the atmosphere of its era perfectly. Early 2000s comedies often relied on energetic music to keep scenes moving, and White Chicks uses that approach effectively. The songs don't simply fill silence, they reinforce the playful mood and help give the movie its recognizable identity. Watching it today, the soundtrack creates a strong sense of nostalgia, reminding viewers of a time when theatrical comedies were a much bigger part of mainstream Hollywood. One production fact that often surprises people is just how demanding the daily filming schedule became because of the extensive makeup process. Reports from the production indicate that several hours were spent preparing Shawn and Marlon Wayans before filming could even begin each day, which meant extremely long working hours once shooting actually started. Despite those challenges, the performances never looked tired or uncomfortable. The amount of energy both actors maintain throughout the movie becomes even more impressive once you consider everything happening behind the scenes. Financially, the film proved that audience support can completely reshape a movie's reputation. While critics gave mixed to negative reviews, audiences kept showing up, allowing White Chicks to earn more than $110 million worldwide against its estimated $37 million production budget. That's a strong result for an original comedy without superheroes, established cinematic universes, or massive visual spectacle. It showed that a memorable concept and entertaining performances could still draw a large audience. Another reason the movie remains relevant is how people continue sharing clips and memorable moments online. Long before short-form video became popular, White Chicks had already created scenes that viewers loved quoting and revisiting. Years later, those same moments keep circulating across social media, introducing the film to younger audiences who may not have been old enough to watch it when it first premiered. That's a rare achievement, because many comedies lose visibility over time, while this one keeps finding new fans through word of mouth and internet culture. Looking back on everything discussed so far, I think White Chicks succeeds because it understands exactly what it wants to deliver. It isn't trying to be an emotional drama or a sophisticated satire hidden beneath layers of comedy. Its mission is much simpler: entertain with bold performances, unforgettable characters, outrageous situations, and non-stop energy. Whether someone considers it one of the funniest movies ever made or simply an enjoyable comedy, it's hard to deny the lasting impact it has had on audiences. More than 20 years after its release, people are still talking about it, still quoting it, and still recommending it to friends looking for a comedy that isn't afraid to be completely ridiculous. One thing I genuinely admire about White Chicks is that it never depends on a single style of comedy. A lot of films land on one joke that works and then keep repeating it until the audience gets tired of it. This movie avoids that trap by constantly changing the way it tries to make people laugh. Sometimes the humor comes from exaggerated reactions, sometimes from awkward misunderstandings, and other times from the complete confidence with which the characters behave in impossible situations. That variety keeps the experience fresh, since every few minutes the movie finds a different way to surprise the audience. The writing also deserves recognition for understanding that comedy works best when the characters believe everything happening around them is perfectly normal. Imagine if the leads constantly reminded the audience how ridiculous the premise was, and the illusion would disappear almost immediately. Instead, everyone treats even the most unbelievable situations with complete seriousness. That choice lets viewers become part of the movie's strange world instead of standing outside it and questioning every detail. It's a surprisingly effective storytelling choice, because the humor grows naturally from the characters rather than from constant self-aware jokes. Shawn and Marlon Wayans continue to prove why they became two of the most recognizable comedy performers of their generation. Their greatest strength isn't simply making funny faces or delivering loud punchlines, it's their willingness to fully commit to every situation, no matter how absurd it becomes. Neither actor ever appears embarrassed by the material, and that confidence is contagious. Once the audience sees how seriously the performers treat the comedy, it becomes much easier to accept the movie's exaggerated reality and simply enjoy the ride. Something I appreciated much more on this viewing was the amount of physical control both actors display throughout the film. Their movements, posture, facial expressions, and even the way they walk are all carefully calibrated to support each character. That's not something viewers always notice on the first watch, since the jokes naturally grab most of the attention, but looking closer, it's clear a great deal of preparation went into making every movement feel consistent. Those small performance details help sell the illusion far more than people usually realize. The supporting cast continues to play an important role in maintaining the movie's rhythm. Terry Crews remains one of the film's biggest scene stealers because of his incredible commitment and impeccable comedic timing. His confidence makes every interaction more entertaining, and many of the movie's most memorable moments come from his reactions rather than elaborate dialogue. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the cast also understand exactly what kind of movie they're making. Nobody tries to perform in a different style, and that consistency helps the comedy feel much more natural. From a filmmaking perspective, I also think the production design deserves more attention. The luxurious houses, fashionable locations, glamorous events, and carefully designed sets all contribute to the exaggerated atmosphere the movie is creating. None of these environments feel accidental. Everything supports the playful parody of celebrity lifestyles and high society culture that the film explores through comedy. The colorful production design gives the story extra personality while making the world feel larger than life without becoming visually overwhelming. The cinematography remains simple but effective throughout the movie. Rather than relying on flashy camera movements, it focuses on capturing the performances as clearly as possible, which is exactly what a comedy like this needs, since facial expressions and body language are often the funniest part of a scene. The camera rarely distracts from the actors, letting viewers fully appreciate every awkward pause, exaggerated reaction, and perfectly timed expression. It's the kind of invisible filmmaking that often goes unnoticed because it's doing its job so well. The soundtrack continues to help define the film's energetic personality. Early 2000s music plays a huge role in creating the movie's identity, and hearing those songs today immediately brings back memories for many viewers. Instead of feeling outdated, The music has become part of the film's nostalgic appeal, another reason White Chicks remains enjoyable on repeat viewings. The soundtrack doesn't just accompany the scenes, it reinforces the playful atmosphere that runs through the entire movie from beginning to end. One interesting behind-the-scenes detail is that the extensive prosthetic makeup required constant maintenance during filming, because the actors performed energetic scenes under bright studio lights. The makeup team frequently had to make adjustments between takes to keep everything looking consistent. That level of attention required tremendous patience from both the performers and the crew, and when you think about the number of shooting days involved, it's easy to appreciate how much effort went into maintaining the illusion across the entire production. Another reason the movie keeps attracting new audiences is its reputation. Built through word of mouth. Many people who watch White Chicks today weren't even old enough to see it in theaters back in 2004. Instead, they discover it because friends, family members, or social media clips recommend it as one of those comedies everyone should watch at least once. That's a difficult reputation to earn. Movies usually fade from public conversation after a few years. But this one keeps resurfacing because people genuinely enjoy sharing their favorite moments with others. After revisiting so much of the film, I think its greatest achievement is that it never pretends to be anything other than an entertaining comedy. It doesn't chase award recognition, complicated storytelling, or dramatic twists. Instead, it focuses on delivering memorable performances, fast-paced humor, colorful production values, and a consistently energetic atmosphere. That honesty gives White Chicks a charm that's hard to imitate. Whether every joke works or not will always depend on individual taste, but the movie's confidence, commitment, and willingness to embrace complete absurdity have allowed it to remain one of the most recognizable comedy films of the early 2000s. One of the biggest reasons White Chicks keeps attracting viewers after all these years is that it feels completely comfortable with its own identity. A lot of comedies eventually try to become something they're not halfway through. They suddenly lurch toward heavy drama or try to deliver an emotional message that doesn't really fit what came before. This movie never falls into that trap. It knows its purpose is to entertain, and every creative decision supports that goal. That consistency gives the entire experience a smooth rhythm, because the audience always understands the kind of movie they're watching. While revisiting the film, I also realized how much of the comedy depends on timing rather than dialogue alone. There are plenty of funny lines, but many of the biggest laughs happen because of a pause, a reaction, or the way a character looks at someone without saying anything. That's something people often overlook when talking about comedy. A joke on paper isn't automatically funny. The actor has to know exactly when to deliver it, when to wait, and when to let another person's reaction become the real punchline. Shawn and Marlon Wayans clearly understand that rhythm, and it's one of the strongest parts of their performances. The chemistry between the two leads also keeps growing stronger the longer the movie goes on. Since they've worked together on multiple projects throughout their careers, there's a natural comfort between them that can't easily be manufactured through rehearsal alone. Conversations never sound mechanical. Interruptions feel spontaneous, and even arguments have an effortless rhythm. That familiarity lets them take bigger comedic risks, because each actor instinctively understands how the other will respond. The result is a partnership that feels genuine, even inside the movie's completely exaggerated world. Another aspect that deserves appreciation is how confidently the film uses physical comedy without leaning on expensive visual effects. Modern comedies sometimes rely heavily on digital tricks, but White Chicks mostly trusts its performers. Whether it's awkward movement, exaggerated expressions, uncomfortable situations, or perfectly timed reactions, the humor usually comes straight from the actors. That gives the movie a timeless quality, Since practical comedy often ages better than jokes built around technology that quickly becomes outdated, the supporting performances continue to make the movie feel much bigger than just two leads carrying the entire story. Terry Crews remains unforgettable because he approaches every scene with absolute sincerity. He never behaves as though he's trying to create a viral moment or force a laugh. Instead, he completely believes in his character, letting the comedy develop naturally from that confidence. The same can be said for Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the ensemble. Every performer contributes to the overall energy instead of competing for attention. Looking at the direction again, Keenan Ivory Wayans deserves recognition for understanding how quickly comedy can lose momentum if scenes stay on screen too long. Throughout the movie, the pacing remains surprisingly efficient. Just as one joke reaches its natural conclusion, another situation begins. That constant movement keeps the audience from dwelling on whether every individual gag worked perfectly. Instead, the movie keeps pushing forward with fresh ideas, creating an entertaining rhythm that rarely slows down for long. The editing quietly supports that fast pace in ways many viewers probably never notice. In comedy, editing is almost like another performer. Holding a shot for half a second longer can completely change whether a joke succeeds. Watching White Chicks carefully, it's clear the editors understood exactly when to cut away and when to stay with an actor's reaction. Those decisions make the humor feel much sharper, since every important expression gets just enough time to register before the story moves forward. The costume and wardrobe departments also deserve another mention. Beyond the impressive prosthetic makeup, clothing becomes a huge part of each character's identity. The glamorous outfits, luxury fashion, accessories, and hairstyles all help build the exaggerated lifestyle the movie is parodying. Even viewers who know very little about fashion can immediately read the personalities being presented, because the wardrobe communicates so much without needing extra dialogue. That's smart visual storytelling, and it helps the comedy feel richer without becoming complicated. One production detail that often goes unnoticed is the amount of planning required to coordinate scenes involving heavy prosthetics, costume changes, and physical comedy all at once. Every shooting day involved far more preparation than a typical comedy, since makeup applications reportedly took several hours before filming could even begin. After that, the actors still had to perform energetic scenes under hot studio lights while maintaining the same level of enthusiasm from the first take to the last. Knowing that makes their performances even more impressive, since very little of that physical effort is visible on screen. Looking at the movie's reputation today, it's fascinating how much audience opinion has evolved over the years. While critics were divided at the time of release, the public kept embracing the film through repeat viewings, television broadcasts, streaming platforms, and online clips. It's now widely considered one of the defining studio comedies of the early 2000s. That kind of long-term popularity can't be manufactured through marketing alone. It happens because people genuinely enjoy revisiting the movie and introducing it to new viewers, which is exactly what has happened with White Chicks for more than 2 decades. The more I revisit this film, the more I appreciate its honesty. It never tries to disguise itself as something more sophisticated than it is. Instead, it proudly embraces exaggerated comedy, memorable performances, colorful production values, and non-stop entertainment. That confidence is what gives the movie its lasting identity. Even viewers who don't consider it their favorite comedy usually remember it years later, because it isn't afraid to be different. In a genre full of films that are quickly forgotten, White Chicks continues to stand out simply because it commits completely to its own outrageous personality. As I kept revisiting White Chicks, something else became obvious to me. The movie doesn't ask the audience to think too hard about whether its premise could actually happen. Instead, it asks a much simpler question: are you willing to have fun for the next couple of hours? If the answer is yes, the movie rewards that mindset with constant energy, memorable characters, and a style of comedy that rarely slows down. That willingness to fully embrace entertainment is one of the reasons it has aged much better with audiences than many people expected when it first arrived. Another reason the film remains enjoyable is that it never seems embarrassed by its own sense of humor. Some comedies seem afraid audiences will judge them for being silly, so they constantly interrupt themselves with self-aware jokes. White Chicks doesn't do that. It commits completely to every outrageous situation and lets the audience laugh because the characters themselves stay serious. Ironically, that confidence makes the comedy feel even stronger. Rather less the movie tries to explain itself, the easier it becomes to simply accept its exaggerated world and enjoy everything happening on screen. The Wayans brothers deserve tremendous credit for maintaining that illusion from beginning to end. Comedy of this style depends almost entirely on commitment. If either Shawn or Marlon looked uncomfortable or uncertain for even a few moments, the entire concept could start falling apart. Instead, both actors stayed fully invested throughout the film. Their confidence lets the audience stop questioning the impossible premise and focus entirely on the personalities they're creating. That's a much harder achievement than it might appear, since exaggerated comedy requires just as much discipline as dramatic acting. One performance I found myself appreciating even more this time was Terry Crews's. His scenes have become legendary among fans because of the complete sincerity he brings to every interaction. He never plays the role like someone trying to steal attention. Instead, he behaves as though every emotion, every conversation, and every decision makes perfect sense. That honesty creates some of the funniest moments in the movie, because the audience understands the absurdity even while the character remains completely convinced by his own reality. Great comedy often comes from exactly that contrast. The screenplay also deserves recognition for avoiding unnecessary complexity. Instead of filling the story with multiple confusing subplots, it stays focused on the central idea and keeps building new comedic situations around it. That doesn't mean the writing is lazy. In fact, keeping a simple concept entertaining for an entire feature-length movie often requires more creativity than writing something complicated. Every new scene has to introduce fresh energy without repeating the same joke. For the most part, White Chicks manages that balance surprisingly well, which is one of the reasons the pacing stays so lively. Looking at the production itself, the movie still feels polished despite being more than 20 years old. The lighting, costumes, locations, and makeup all work together to create a colorful world that perfectly matches the exaggerated tone of the comedy. Nothing looks unfinished or cheaply assembled. Even though this isn't a visual effects-driven blockbuster, it's clear a considerable amount of effort went into making every location and costume support the overall atmosphere. That attention to detail helps the audience stay immersed in the film's playful version of reality. The soundtrack continues to add another layer of personality. Many songs instantly remind viewers of the early 2000s. And that nostalgic feeling has become one of the movie's unexpected strengths. Music often plays a bigger role in comedy than people realize, since it influences the rhythm of scenes and helps maintain momentum between jokes. Here, the soundtrack consistently supports the fast pace without overpowering the performances. It complements the movie rather than competing with it, which is exactly what a good comedy soundtrack should do. One behind-the-scenes fact that deserves mention is the incredible amount of preparation required before cameras even started rolling each day. Reports from the production revealed that Shawn and Marlon Wayans often spent several hours in the makeup chair applying prosthetics before filming could begin, and that routine continued day after day throughout production. Once filming finally started, they still had to perform energetic physical comedy while wearing heavy makeup under bright studio lighting. When you consider those long working days, it's even easier to appreciate the enthusiasm they maintain throughout the finished movie. The film's long-term popularity also says something important about audience taste. Critics and general viewers don't always evaluate comedy the same way. Professional reviews often focus on structure, originality, or technical filmmaking, while audiences usually ask a much simpler question: was it entertaining? In the case of White Chicks, many viewers answered that question with a clear yes. Over time, repeated television broadcasts, DVD sales, streaming services, and online clips introduced the movie to entirely new generations, letting its reputation grow well beyond its original theatrical release. Something I also admire is how rewatchable the movie has become. Many comedies lose their appeal after the first viewing, because surprise is such an important part of humor. White Chicks works differently. Once you already know the story, you start noticing smaller details that were easy to miss before. Tiny facial expressions, background reactions, clever editing choices, and subtle performance details become easier to appreciate. That's usually a sign a comedy has more going for it than just its biggest punchlines. After spending even more time with the film, I think its greatest achievement is that it creates an experience people genuinely enjoy sharing with others. It's the kind of movie friends recommend during a comedy night, siblings quote years later, and families revisit simply because they know everyone will have a good time. Not every joke works for every viewer, and that's completely normal for any comedy, but the film's fearless energy, memorable performances, and complete commitment to its unusual concept have helped it earn a place among the most recognizable studio comedies of the early 2000s. More than 2 decades later, that reputation still feels well-deserved. By the time I reached this point with White Chicks, I started appreciating something that often gets overlooked whenever people discuss the movie. Most conversations focus on the outrageous concept or the biggest comedy scenes, but very few people talk about how much confidence it takes to build an entire feature around an idea that could have easily failed. There was always a risk that audiences would reject the premise before giving the movie a chance. Instead, the filmmakers trusted their cast, trusted the comedy, and, most importantly, trusted that viewers would accept the film's exaggerated world if it stayed consistent. Looking back now, I think that confidence became one of the movie's greatest strengths. The Wayans brothers have always understood that comedy isn't just about delivering funny dialogue, it's about creating situations where the audience almost starts laughing before anyone even says a word. Throughout White Chicks, there are countless moments where the setup alone builds anticipation, because viewers already know something awkward is about to happen. The performances make those scenes work because Shawn and Marlon Wayans never rush the comedy. They let uncomfortable silences, hesitant reactions, and subtle facial expressions build tension before finally delivering the payoff. That patience makes many of the jokes far more effective than non-stop punchlines would be. One thing I enjoyed during this rewatch was seeing how carefully the actors controlled their physical performances. Comedy often demands a completely different skill set than drama, because every movement matters. Walking, sitting, turning around, making eye contact, or even standing still can become part of the joke if the timing is right. Both leads show impressive control over those details throughout the movie. Their performances don't simply rely on the costumes or prosthetic makeup. Every gesture feels intentionally designed to support the personalities they're portraying, which adds another layer to the humor. Another reason the film continues working so well is the chemistry across the entire cast. Comedy becomes much stronger when every performer understands the tone of the movie, and that's exactly what happens here. Terry Crews once again delivers one of the most memorable supporting performances because of his complete sincerity. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the ensemble also contribute by fully committing to the exaggerated reality instead of questioning it. That shared commitment lets every interaction feel natural within the movie's unique world. From a filmmaking perspective, I think the production deserves more praise than it usually gets. Even though this isn't a visual spectacle in the traditional sense, a surprising amount of craftsmanship went into making the world feel polished and believable. The locations, wardrobe, lighting, makeup, and overall production design all work together to support the glamorous lifestyle being parodied. Nothing appears careless or unfinished. Every visual element reinforces the same playful atmosphere, letting the comedy remain the center of attention without distractions. The cinematography follows that same philosophy. Instead of trying to impress viewers with complicated camera techniques, it focuses on capturing the performances as clearly as possible. Comedy depends heavily on expressions and reactions, so keeping the actors visible matters far more than flashy visual style. The camera rarely calls attention to itself, and I actually think that's one of the smartest creative decisions in the entire production. It quietly supports the performances rather than competing with them, letting the audience enjoy every awkward pause and exaggerated reaction exactly as intended. Music continues playing an important role throughout the experience. The soundtrack captures the energy of the early 2000s and gives the movie an identity that's instantly recognizable. Hearing many of these songs today creates an immediate sense of nostalgia for viewers who grew up during that era. Instead of feeling dated, the music has become one of the reasons people enjoy revisiting the film. It reminds audiences of a period when theatrical studio comedies were a major part of Hollywood entertainment and original comedy concepts regularly reached the big screen. One behind-the-scenes detail that deserves attention is the amount of collaboration required between the actors and the makeup department. Heavy prosthetics meant every facial movement had to remain convincing while still allowing enough flexibility for expressive comedy. Maintaining that balance throughout months of filming couldn't have been easy. The makeup artists reportedly spent several hours each day preparing the leads before filming even started, and regular touch-ups were necessary throughout production. Considering everything involved, it's impressive how natural many of the performances still feel despite those physical limitations. It's also interesting to look at how White Chicks' reputation has changed over time. When it first premiered, many reviews focused on what the movie wasn't, instead of appreciating what it was trying to accomplish. Audiences approached it differently. Most viewers simply wanted an entertaining comedy, and that's exactly what they got. As years passed, repeat viewings, television broadcasts, DVD collections, streaming services, and internet clips helped the film reach millions of additional viewers. Today, it's often remembered far more fondly than its original critical reception suggested it would be. Something else that deserves recognition is how quotable the movie became. Great comedies usually leave behind moments audiences remember long after the story itself fades from memory. White Chicks accomplished exactly that. Even people who haven't watched the film in years often remember specific scenes, character interactions, or memorable reactions. That kind of cultural impact can't really be measured through review scores alone. It develops naturally over time as audiences keep sharing favorite moments with friends, family members, and newer generations of viewers. After spending even more time with the movie, I think one of its greatest achievements is that it never loses its enthusiasm. From beginning to end, the energy stays consistently high, because every performer commits fully to the experience. The story never becomes embarrassed by its own concept. The performances never lose confidence, and the filmmaking consistently supports the same playful tone. That unwavering commitment is what has allowed White Chicks to remain a recognizable comedy more than 20 years after its release. It may not have been everyone's favorite film when it first arrived, but its lasting popularity proves that audiences connected with its fearless sense of humor in a way critics simply couldn't predict. After spending even more time with White Chicks, I started thinking about why this movie keeps finding new audiences even after more than 20 years. A big reason is that it doesn't feel like a comedy carefully designed by committee to please everyone. Instead, it feels like a group of filmmakers who had complete confidence in one unusual idea and decided to push it as far as they possibly could. That creative freedom gives the movie a personality that's difficult to copy. Whether someone loves every joke or not, it's impossible to say the film lacks identity, since every scene reflects the same fearless approach. One area where the movie quietly succeeds is consistency. Many comedies begin with a strong concept but slowly lose focus as the story goes on. White Chicks avoids that problem by constantly building on its central premise rather than abandoning it halfway through. Every new situation creates another opportunity for awkward interactions, misunderstandings, or exaggerated reactions. Because the writers stay focused on the same core idea, the movie feels surprisingly unified despite its intentionally ridiculous tone. Watching Shawn and Marlon Wayans again, I found myself appreciating how much discipline goes into performances like these. At first glance, everything appears spontaneous, but comedy of this kind actually requires tremendous precision. Every pause, every expression, every change in body language has to land at exactly the right moment. If the timing is slightly off, even a well-written joke can lose its impact. Both actors demonstrate remarkable control throughout the film, making difficult comedic performances look completely effortless. Another thing that impressed me was how naturally the movie balances loud comedy with quieter character moments. It's easy to remember the biggest laughs because they're so memorable, but the smaller interactions also play an important role. Those quieter scenes let the audience relax for a moment before the next wave of comedy arrives. Without that balance, non-stop jokes could easily become exhausting. Instead, the film creates a rhythm that keeps viewers engaged from beginning to end. The supporting cast deserves another round of praise, because everyone understands exactly what kind of movie they're making. Terry Crews remains unforgettable, not simply because of individual scenes, but because of the complete confidence he brings to every appearance. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the ensemble also help create a believable environment within the movie's exaggerated reality. Nobody seems uncertain about the tone, and that consistency lets the comedy feel much stronger than it otherwise would. From a technical perspective, I also think the film deserves recognition for its production values. Comedies often get less credit for craftsmanship because audiences naturally focus on the jokes. Looking more carefully, though, it's clear the production team put significant effort into making every location, costume, hairstyle, and piece of makeup support the film's playful atmosphere. Everything feels polished without becoming distracting, letting the performances remain the center of attention. The makeup effects continue to stand out as one of the production's most ambitious achievements. Creating convincing prosthetics is already difficult, but designing them for actors performing energetic physical comedy presents an even bigger challenge. The prosthetics had to stay consistent throughout long shooting days while still allowing expressive facial movements. Considering the technology available in 2004, the final result remains surprisingly impressive and continues to be one of the movie's most recognizable visual elements. Music also deserves another mention, because it contributes heavily to the overall experience. The soundtrack captures the spirit of the early 2000s without overwhelming the scenes. Many tracks have become closely associated with the movie itself, making them instantly recognizable to longtime fans. That's another reason the film has become so nostalgic over the years. For many viewers, revisiting White Chicks isn't only about the comedy. It's also about returning to a specific era of entertainment that feels very different from today's Hollywood. One interesting production fact is that filming under heavy prosthetics required constant communication between the performers and the makeup department. Long shooting days, bright lights, and physically demanding scenes meant regular adjustments were necessary to keep every appearance consistent. While audiences rarely think about those technical challenges during the movie, they played an essential role in making the central illusion believable enough for the comedy to succeed. It's another example of how much work happened behind the scenes to support what looks effortless on screen. The movie's reputation today also proves that time can completely change how film is remembered. Plenty of comedies get positive reviews when they're released, then disappear from public conversation a few years later. White Chicks followed the opposite path. Critics were divided, yet audiences kept embracing it through repeat viewings, streaming services, television broadcasts, and internet clips. That slow growth turned it into one of the most recognizable comedy films of its generation, a reminder that lasting popularity often depends more on audience connection than on opening week reviews. Looking back over everything discussed so far, I think the film's biggest strength is its complete commitment to entertainment. It never pauses to apologize for its ridiculous premise or tries to convince viewers it's something more sophisticated than it really is. Instead, it confidently delivers energetic performances, memorable supporting characters, colorful production values, and a style of comedy that's comfortable being loud, playful, and completely unapologetic. That honesty has helped White Chicks stay relevant for more than 2 decades, and it's a big reason why so many people still recommend it whenever someone asks for a fun comedy to watch. Rewatching White Chicks today, I think one of the film's most underrated qualities is how comfortable it is with being unpredictable. Even though you understand the general direction of the story, individual scenes rarely play out exactly the way you expect. Instead of relying on obvious setups followed by predictable punchlines, the movie often finds humor in unexpected reactions or situations that suddenly become much more ridiculous than they first appeared. That unpredictability keeps the comedy feeling energetic, because the audience is never quite sure how each moment will unfold. The Wayans brothers also deserve recognition for understanding the difference between loud comedy and effective comedy. A lot of people assume making audiences laugh simply means speaking louder or behaving more wildly. But White Chicks proves that timing matters far more than volume. Shawn and Marlon know exactly when to exaggerate a reaction and when a smaller expression will actually produce a bigger laugh. That control gives their performances a rhythm that feels surprisingly natural despite the outrageous premise. One of those details that's easy to overlook until you watch the movie more carefully. Another thing I appreciated was how the movie lets different styles of humor exist side by side without feeling disconnected. Physical comedy remains the foundation, but there are also awkward conversations, social misunderstandings, visual jokes, character-driven humor, and playful satire. That variety keeps the experience from becoming repetitive, since the audience isn't getting the same kind of joke over and over. Every few minutes, the film shifts its comedic approach just enough to keep things fresh while still maintaining the same overall tone. The chemistry between the cast continues to make a huge difference. Terry Crews once again stands out because of the complete sincerity he brings to every scene. His confidence lets the comedy happen naturally instead of looking forced. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the supporting cast also deserve praise because they fully embrace the exaggerated reality of the story. Nobody performs as though they're embarrassed by the material, and that shared commitment helps the entire movie feel much more believable within its own unique rules. Looking at the direction again, Keenan Ivory Wayans demonstrates a clear understanding of comedic pacing. He rarely lets scenes run past their funniest point. Instead, the movie keeps moving forward, introducing new situations before the audience has time to lose interest. That constant momentum becomes one of the film's greatest strengths, because it creates the feeling that something entertaining is always about to happen. Even viewers who don't laugh at every single joke are unlikely to get bored, since the energy stays consistently high. The technical side of the production deserves another mention as well. Comedy often gets less recognition for craftsmanship than action or drama, but White Chicks quietly showcases impressive work across several departments. The costume design, production design, lighting, hairstyling, and makeup all contribute to building a glamorous world that perfectly supports the story's playful parody. Every visual detail reinforces the atmosphere without distracting from the performances, letting the humor remain the main focus. The prosthetic makeup continues to stand as one of the movie's biggest achievements. Even today, it's hard not to appreciate the amount of planning that went into creating those transformations. The makeup artists faced the challenge of making the characters visually convincing while preserving enough facial movement for expressive comedy. Achieving both goals at once required remarkable technical skill, and the final result became one of the most memorable aspects of the entire film. Music also continues adding personality throughout the movie. Many tracks immediately transport viewers back to the early 2000s, giving the film an unmistakable nostalgic atmosphere. Rather than feeling outdated, those musical choices now help define the movie's identity. That's one of the reasons White Chicks has become such a popular rewatch for many viewers. It's not just the comedy they return for, but also the feeling of revisiting a specific period in Hollywood when studios regularly produced bold original comedies aimed at wide audiences. Another interesting fact about the film's legacy is how often it comes up in discussions about cult favorite comedies. While the movie performed well financially during its theatrical run, its popularity kept growing through home video, cable television, streaming platforms, and social media. Entire generations who never experienced its original release have still become familiar with its most memorable moments. Very few studio comedies have managed to stay this visible for more than 20 years, which says a great deal about the movie's lasting entertainment value. Looking back now, it's easy to understand why audience opinion became so much stronger than critical opinion. Critics often evaluate films by asking whether they break new artistic ground or deliver something technically innovative. Audiences usually approach comedy with a much simpler expectation: they want to laugh and enjoy themselves. White Chicks delivers exactly that. It doesn't pretend to be profound or emotionally life-changing. Instead, it embraces its outrageous premise with complete confidence and focuses entirely on entertaining viewers. That honesty has allowed it to stay relevant long after many other early 2000s comedies faded from memory. The more I revisit this movie, the more convinced I become that confidence is the key reason it still works. Every department, from the performers to the director, the writers, the makeup artists, and the production team, believed completely in the world they were creating. That belief is visible in every scene, and audiences continue responding to it decades later. Whether someone considers White Chicks a favorite comedy or simply an enjoyable way to spend an evening, it's hard to deny the lasting cultural impact it has had. That's something very few comedies ever achieve, and it's a major reason the film continues earning new fans even today. The more time I spend revisiting White Chicks, the more I realize its biggest achievement isn't simply making people laugh. Plenty of comedies can do that once. The real achievement is staying memorable for years after release, and that's something this film has managed surprisingly well. Even people who haven't watched it in a long time usually remember specific characters, memorable exchanges, and the overall energy of the movie. That kind of lasting recognition is difficult to earn, because comedy changes faster than almost any other genre. Humor that works in one decade can easily feel outdated in the next. Yet White Chicks still finds audiences willing to give it a chance. One reason for that lasting appeal is the movie's commitment to entertaining its audience instead of chasing trends. While some comedies rely heavily on jokes tied to a particular moment in pop culture, this film spends most of its time building humor around personalities, awkward situations, misunderstandings, and exaggerated confidence, ideas that remain understandable regardless of when someone watches the movie. A few references clearly belong to the early 2000s. But the foundation of the comedy isn't dependent on knowing every celebrity or fashion trend from that period. That gives the film a much longer shelf life than many of its contemporaries. Watching Shawn and Marlon Wayans again, I was reminded how much energy they bring to every single scene. Maintaining that level of enthusiasm across an entire feature-length comedy is far more difficult than it looks. Comedy often demands multiple takes to perfect timing, and every retake requires the same excitement as the first one. Neither performer ever appears to lose momentum. Whether the scene depends on physical comedy, quick dialogue, or subtle reactions, they approach every moment with complete commitment. That consistency is one of the strongest reasons the movie never feels tired. The supporting cast continues to reinforce that same level of dedication. Terry Crews remains unforgettable because he completely trusts the material without trying to play above it. His confidence lets the humor develop naturally, making many of his scenes some of the most memorable in the film. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the ensemble also understand exactly what tone the movie is aiming for. Nobody seems to be acting in a different film, and that shared understanding creates a smooth comedic rhythm from beginning to end. Looking at the screenplay again, I appreciate how often it introduces new comedic situations instead of simply repeating successful jokes. It would have been very easy for the writers to lean on one formula throughout the entire runtime, but they keep finding different ways to explore the central premise. Some scenes focus on awkward conversations, others on physical comedy, and others depend almost entirely on timing and reactions. That constant variety helps keep the film from becoming repetitive and gives viewers another reason to stay engaged throughout. From a production standpoint, White Chicks also deserves praise for creating a polished visual identity. The wardrobe, hairstyles, luxury locations, and production design all contribute to a glamorous atmosphere that perfectly supports the story's playful satire. Every environment feels carefully prepared rather than thrown together at the last minute. Those details may not get much attention on a first viewing, since the comedy naturally dominates the experience, but they quietly strengthen the world the filmmakers were trying to create. The makeup department deserves another round of appreciation, because their work remains central to the movie's success. Without convincing prosthetics, the entire concept would have struggled to win audience acceptance. Creating those transformations while preserving expressive facial movement required impressive craftsmanship. Even though makeup technology has continued improving over the years, the work done for White Chicks remains one of the film's defining technical achievements, and it continues to come up whenever people look back at its production. Music continues supporting the overall atmosphere without demanding attention for itself. The soundtrack keeps scenes moving smoothly and reinforces the playful mood that runs throughout the film. Many of the songs instantly remind viewers of the early 2000s. Giving the movie an added layer of nostalgia. That's one reason returning to White Chicks feels enjoyable even after many years. The soundtrack helps transport audiences back to the period when the movie first became popular, adding emotional value beyond the comedy itself. It's also interesting to see how the movie's reputation has grown through repeated recommendations rather than major awards or critical praise. Friends keep suggesting it to friends. Families introduce it to younger viewers, and memorable scenes keep circulating online. That kind of organic popularity is often stronger than any marketing campaign, because it develops naturally over time. When a comedy keeps making people want to share it with others decades later, that's usually a strong sign it has created a genuine connection with audiences. Another point worth mentioning is how well the movie understands pacing. It never spends too much time explaining its own premise or slowing the story with unnecessary exposition. Instead, it quickly establishes its exaggerated world and trusts viewers to keep up. That confidence lets the film focus on entertainment rather than constant explanation, a simple decision, but one that plays a major role in keeping the movie lively from beginning to end. Looking back over everything discussed so far, I think White Chicks succeeds because it never forgets why audiences came to watch it in the first place. People weren't looking for a serious drama or a complex mystery. They wanted an energetic comedy with memorable performances and non-stop entertainment. The film delivers exactly that through confident direction, committed acting, strong comedic timing, polished production values, and a willingness to fully embrace its outrageous premise. More than 20 years later, those qualities continue to make it one of the most recognizable and frequently recommended comedy films of its era. What impresses me most about White Chicks is how confidently it sticks to its own identity without trying to reinvent itself halfway through. A lot of comedies eventually start chasing emotional moments so aggressively that the humor fades into the background. This film never lets that happen. It understands that its biggest strength is making the audience enjoy the experience from beginning to end, so every creative decision continues supporting that goal. The result is a movie that feels consistent from its opening scenes all the way through its final act. One aspect that becomes more noticeable on repeat viewings is how carefully the comedy is built around reactions instead of constant dialogue. Some of the funniest moments don't depend on clever one-liners at all. Instead, they rely on a look across the room, an uncomfortable pause, or a character trying to stay calm while everything around them gets increasingly ridiculous. Those reaction-based moments often age better than topical jokes, because they depend on human behavior rather than references that eventually become outdated. That's one reason the movie still feels entertaining after so many years. Shawn and Marlon Wayans continue carrying the film with performances that require remarkable control. At first glance, everything appears spontaneous, but underneath the comedy is a tremendous amount of discipline. Physical comedy only works when actors understand exactly how much energy each moment requires. Too little commitment and the joke falls flat, too much exaggeration and it becomes exhausting. Throughout White Chicks, both performers consistently find that balance, knowing when to let the comedy explode and when a smaller reaction will create a much bigger laugh. The supporting cast deserves continued recognition, because they never treat the material like it's beneath them. Terry Crews remains one of the film's most unforgettable performers, because he completely believes in every emotion his character experiences. That sincerity transforms scenes that could have felt forced into some of the movie's biggest highlights. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the cast also maintain the same level of commitment, creating an exaggerated world where every performer seems to understand exactly what kind of comedy they're making. Looking at Keenan Ivory Wayans' direction again, I think one of his smartest decisions was resisting the temptation to overcomplicate the story. The movie never gets distracted by unnecessary plot twists or overly serious subplots. Instead, it stays focused on delivering entertaining situations one after another. That clear direction helps maintain momentum, since viewers are never pulled away from the comedy for too long. Every scene exists to strengthen the movie's overall energy, and that focus becomes one of its greatest advantages. From a technical standpoint, the production still looks surprisingly polished for a comedy released in 2004. The glamorous locations, colorful wardrobe, carefully designed interiors, and stylish presentation all contribute to the playful atmosphere. Rather than creating a realistic version of high society, the film intentionally exaggerates everything, letting the comedy feel bigger and more expressive. Those production choices give White Chicks a visual identity that's immediately recognizable and continues to stand out years later. The prosthetic makeup remains one of the production's most impressive accomplishments. It's easy to underestimate how difficult those transformations were until you consider everything the actors had to do while wearing them. Expressive comedy demands complete facial freedom, yet heavy prosthetics naturally limit movement. The makeup artists managed to strike a balance that let Shawn and Marlon Wayans remain expressive while still maintaining convincing appearances. Considering the technology available at the time, the work still deserves recognition. Music once again quietly strengthens the overall experience. The soundtrack keeps the pace lively without distracting from the performances, and many of its songs have become closely associated with the movie itself. Hearing those tracks today immediately brings back memories for longtime fans while introducing younger audiences to the energetic atmosphere that defined many Hollywood comedies during the early 2000s. Instead of simply filling silence, the music helped shape the movie's personality from beginning to end. Another reason the film keeps finding new viewers is its incredible replay value. There are countless comedies that earn a laugh on the first viewing but lose much of their impact once the surprise disappears. White Chicks works differently, because so much of its humor comes from performance rather than shock. Watching it again often reveals small expressions, background reactions, and subtle timing choices that are easy to miss the first time. That gives audiences another reason to return to the movie years later, even when they already know every major scene. The film's legacy also demonstrates how audience appreciation can grow over time. While professional critics had mixed opinions when it first premiered, viewers kept recommending it through word of mouth, home video, television broadcasts, streaming platforms, and social media. Gradually, White Chicks earned a reputation as one of the defining studio comedies of its generation. That's not something marketing alone can achieve. It happens because people genuinely enjoy revisiting the movie and sharing it with others, letting its popularity grow naturally over the years. After revisiting so much of the film, I think the biggest compliment I can give White Chicks is that it remains exactly what it set out to be. It never pretends to offer something completely different, and it never loses confidence in its unusual concept. Instead, it delivers energetic performances, memorable characters, polished production values, and a style of comedy that's fearless enough to fully embrace its own ridiculousness. That confidence has helped the movie stay relevant for more than 2 decades, and it's a major reason audiences keep discovering it long after its original theatrical release. After spending this much time revisiting White Chicks, I think one of the most interesting things about the movie is how differently it has been judged over the years. When it first arrived in theaters, many critics focused on how outrageous the premise was and questioned whether that kind of comedy could really hold an entire film together. Audiences looked at it from a completely different angle. Most people weren't searching for realism or subtle storytelling. They wanted a comedy that would help them relax, laugh, and enjoy themselves for a couple of hours. That's exactly what the movie offered, and the gap between critical opinion and audience reaction has only become more noticeable as time has passed. Another quality that stands out is how well the film understands its own rhythm. Comedy depends heavily on pacing, and White Chicks rarely lets itself become stagnant. Every time one situation reaches its natural conclusion, another awkward encounter, misunderstanding, or unexpected interaction appears to keep the momentum alive. That constant movement is one of the reasons the movie still feels shorter than its actual runtime. It doesn't spend long stretches explaining itself or slowing everything down. Instead, it keeps the audience engaged by making sure something entertaining is always around the corner. The performances continue carrying much of that momentum. Shawn and Marlon Wayans deserve enormous credit, because they maintain the same level of enthusiasm from beginning to end. That's not an easy achievement, especially considering the physical demands of these roles. Long hours in prosthetic makeup, repeated takes, energetic scenes, and constant physical comedy could easily drain a performance, but neither actor ever appears to lose confidence. Every expression, every movement, and every reaction feels committed, giving the movie an energy that stays consistent throughout its runtime. Terry Crews also continues to prove why his role has become one of the film's most talked about performances. His success comes from complete sincerity rather than exaggerated self-awareness. He never behaves like someone trying to create a famous comedy scene. Instead, he approaches every interaction with genuine conviction, letting the humor develop naturally from the contrast between his confidence and the increasingly ridiculous situations surrounding him. That's one of the reasons his scenes remain so memorable years later. They're funny because the performance is honest within the movie's exaggerated reality. The supporting cast deserves just as much appreciation for maintaining that same commitment. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the ensemble all contribute to a world where every character feels completely comfortable with the film's unusual tone. Nobody looks uncertain about how seriously to play a scene. Everyone commits to the same style of comedy, and that consistency lets the audience accept even the most unbelievable moments without constantly questioning them. Looking at the filmmaking itself, I also appreciate how polished the movie continues to feel. The production design, wardrobe, lighting, hairstyling, and makeup all support the same glamorous atmosphere the story is parodying. Rather than overwhelming viewers with visual spectacle, the production quietly creates an environment where the comedy can flourish. Every location feels carefully chosen, every costume reinforces a character's personality, and every visual detail contributes to the overall identity of the film without distracting from the performances. The makeup department deserves another mention, because their work remains central to the movie's success. Transforming the leads into such recognizable characters required far more than simply applying prosthetics. Other designs had to stay expressive enough for comedy while surviving long filming days filled with movement, dialogue, and physical performances. That's a remarkably difficult technical challenge, and the finished result continues to be one of the movie's defining achievements. Even viewers who don't love every joke usually acknowledge the incredible amount of work that went into those transformations. Music once again deserves praise for quietly supporting the experience. Instead of dominating scenes, the soundtrack blends naturally into the storytelling, reinforcing both the energy and the nostalgic atmosphere that have become such an important part of the movie's identity. Watching White Chicks today almost feels like revisiting a snapshot of early 2000s Hollywood comedy, and the music plays a huge role in creating that feeling. It's one of those elements audiences might not consciously notice during every scene, yet its absence would immediately change the movie's personality. The legacy of White Chicks has also become increasingly fascinating. Plenty of successful comedies disappear from public conversation after a few years, but this film has followed the opposite path. Streaming platforms, television reruns, internet memes, short video clips, and social media discussions have introduced it to audiences who weren't even born when it originally premiered. That's a remarkable achievement for any comedy, since humor often becomes outdated much faster than other genres. The fact that this movie keeps finding new viewers suggests its strengths go well beyond nostalgia alone. Another reason the film remains popular is its incredible replay value. Once the audience already knows the biggest jokes, attention naturally shifts toward the performances themselves. Small expressions, subtle reactions, carefully timed pauses, and background details become much easier to appreciate on repeat viewings. That's why many fans say they notice something new every time they watch it. A comedy that remains entertaining after multiple viewings has usually done something right, and White Chicks clearly falls into that category. Looking back at everything discussed throughout this review, I think the movie's greatest accomplishment is its unwavering confidence. From the performances and direction to the production design, makeup, music, and writing, every creative decision supports the same bold vision. The filmmakers never hesitate, never apologize for the premise, and never lose faith in the kind of comedy they're making. That confidence has allowed White Chicks to become far more than just another early 2000s comedy. The closer I get to the end of this review, the more I appreciate how White Chicks has managed to outlive many of the comedies released around the same time. Every year brings new comedy films, but only a small number remain part of everyday conversation decades later. This movie has achieved exactly that. Whether people are quoting memorable moments, recommending it to friends, or sharing clips online, it continues finding ways to stay relevant. That kind of longevity usually belongs to films that leave a genuine impression on audiences. And White Chicks has clearly done that. One reason for its lasting popularity is that it never feels overly complicated. The story isn't trying to overwhelm viewers with endless twists or emotional detours. Instead, it focuses on delivering a fun experience through entertaining performances and confident comedy. That simplicity actually works in the movie's favor, because it makes the film incredibly easy to revisit. Viewers don't need to remember dozens of complicated plot details. They simply sit back and enjoy the personalities, the situations, and the rhythm of the comedy. Sometimes the most memorable entertainment comes from knowing exactly what it wants to be. The performances remain the heart of everything. Shawn and Marlon Wayans deserve enormous credit, because they never let their energy fade. Maintaining that level of enthusiasm across an entire production is difficult enough under normal circumstances, but doing it while wearing heavy prosthetics makes the achievement even more impressive. Every conversation, every reaction, and every piece of physical comedy feels carefully controlled without looking rehearsed. That's one of the biggest reasons the movie still works on repeat viewings. Even after you know the jokes, the performances remain entertaining. Terry Crews continues to stand out as one of the movie's greatest surprises. Looking back today, it's easy to understand why his performance became so memorable. He approaches every scene with complete confidence and absolute sincerity, never treating the material like it's beneath him. That honesty lets the comedy happen naturally, and many of his moments have become some of the most frequently shared scenes from the film. It's a perfect reminder that commitment often matters more than the joke itself. The supporting cast deserves another mention, because their reactions quietly strengthen almost every comedic sequence. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, and the rest of the ensemble all understand the exaggerated tone of the movie. Nobody appears to be performing in a different style, and that consistency makes the entire world feel surprisingly believable despite its outrageous premise. Good comedy often depends on how supporting characters react, and this cast understands that exceptionally well. From a filmmaking perspective, I also appreciate how polished the movie continues to look. The glamorous settings, carefully designed costumes, colorful production design, and stylish presentation all support the playful atmosphere the film is creating. None of these technical elements compete with the performances. Instead, they quietly reinforce the overall tone, making the comedy feel larger without becoming distracting. It's a reminder that even broad comedies require strong craftsmanship behind the scenes. The makeup department deserves recognition once again, because the entire concept depends on their work. Creating convincing prosthetics that could survive long filming days while still allowing expressive performances was an enormous technical challenge. Watching the movie today, it's easy to focus only on the jokes, but behind every scene was a team responsible for maintaining the illusion from beginning to end. Their contribution remains one of the production's most impressive accomplishments and plays a major role in why the central premise feels convincing enough for audiences to accept. The soundtrack continues adding energy without demanding attention. Many of the songs immediately place the audience back in the early 2000s. Giving the movie an unmistakable nostalgic identity. Instead of feeling outdated, those musical choices now add charm, since they capture the atmosphere of a particular period in Hollywood comedy. That's another reason revisiting White Chicks feels enjoyable. It's not only the humor that brings viewers back, but also the feeling of returning to a familiar era of entertainment. It's also worth recognizing how much the film's reputation has grown through audience recommendations rather than awards recognition. Many successful movies disappear once their theatrical run ends, but White Chicks kept finding new life through DVDs, television broadcasts, streaming platforms, and social media. Younger viewers who never had the chance to watch it in cinemas continue discovering it through family members, friends, and online clips. That kind of steady popularity is difficult to manufacture and usually reflects a genuine connection with audiences. Looking at the movie as a whole, I think one of its greatest strengths is that it never loses confidence in its own style. Every creative choice supports the same goal of delivering an energetic, unapologetically entertaining comedy. It doesn't pause to explain itself. It doesn't get distracted by unnecessary complexity. And it never seems worried about whether every joke will appeal to every viewer. Instead, it stays true to its identity from beginning to end. And that honesty is a major reason the film has remained memorable for so long. It's clear that White Chicks earned its reputation through much more than its unusual premise. Strong comedic timing, committed performances, polished production values, memorable supporting characters, and a fearless creative approach all helped transform it into one of the most recognizable studio comedies of the early 2000s. More than 20 years after its release, audiences are still laughing, still quoting favorite moments, and still introducing the movie to new viewers. Very few comedies can claim that kind of lasting impact, and it's exactly why White Chicks continues to hold a special place among fans of the genre. After examining nearly every aspect of White Chicks, I think one of the film's greatest strengths is how confidently it delivers exactly what it promises. It never advertises itself as a sophisticated character drama or an emotionally complex story. From the very beginning, it presents itself as an energetic comedy built around an outrageous idea, and then it commits to that idea with remarkable consistency. There's something refreshing about a movie that understands its purpose so clearly. Instead of constantly trying to impress viewers with unnecessary twists or deeper messages, it focuses on making the experience entertaining from start to finish. And that honesty has become one of the biggest reasons people keep returning to it. Comedy is one of the most difficult genres to keep relevant, because humor changes with every generation. Jokes that once felt fresh can quickly lose their impact as audiences evolve. That's why it's so impressive that White Chicks keeps attracting viewers more than 2 decades after its release. Even people too young to have watched it when it first came out are now discovering it through streaming services, recommendations from friends, or short clips shared across social media. The movie has gradually become something larger than its original theatrical release. It has become part of pop culture, and reaching that level of recognition is something only a small number of comedies ever achieve. Shawn and Marlon Wayans deserve tremendous recognition for carrying such an unusual concept with complete confidence. Every successful comedy needs performers who fully believe in the world they're creating, and both actors never let that belief waver. Throughout the production, they balance physical comedy, exaggerated performances, and emotional reactions without making any of it feel forced. The audience laughs because the characters stay completely committed to every situation, no matter how absurd those situations become. That level of dedication is one of the biggest reasons the film continues working after repeated viewings. Terry Crews remains one of the clearest examples of how commitment can turn a supporting role into something unforgettable. He never approaches the material with hesitation or self-consciousness. Instead, he performs every scene with complete sincerity, letting the audience find humor naturally through the contrast between his confidence and the increasingly ridiculous circumstances around him. Looking back today, it's easy to understand why so many viewers consider his performance one of the highlights of the entire movie. His scenes continue being shared online because they remain just as entertaining now as they were when audiences first experienced them. The supporting cast also deserves continued praise, because everyone contributes to the same consistent tone. Busy Phillips, Jaime King, Jennifer Carpenter, Jessica Corfield, Lachlan Monroe, John Hurd, Frank Ifson, and the rest of the ensemble never appear uncertain about the style of comedy they're making. Every performance supports the central concept rather than competing with it. That unity lets the audience become immersed in the exaggerated reality of the story without constantly questioning whether the movie has changed its identity halfway through. Looking at the technical side again, it's impressive how polished the production remains after all these years. The cinematography captures glamorous locations with bright, inviting visuals that perfectly complement the playful atmosphere. Costume design helps define personalities before characters even begin speaking, while production design reinforces the luxurious environment the story is parodying. These visual elements quietly strengthen the comedy, because they create a convincing world where the film's outrageous premise can exist. Naturally, the makeup department deserves one final, extended acknowledgement. Their work was far more demanding than many viewers probably realize. Reports from the production revealed that transforming Shawn and Marlon Wayans into their characters often required several hours of preparation before filming could even begin. Once that lengthy process was complete, they still had to perform physically demanding scenes under intense studio lights while protecting delicate prosthetics from damage. Maintaining continuity across weeks of filming required enormous patience from both the actors and the makeup team. That dedication deserves recognition, because the movie simply wouldn't exist in its current form without their craftsmanship. Music continues giving the film an unmistakable personality. Rather than simply filling background silence, the soundtrack helps establish rhythm, reinforces comedic timing, and captures the atmosphere of early 2000s Hollywood entertainment. Many viewers instantly associate certain songs with this movie, which shows how effectively the music became part of its overall identity. Even years later, hearing those tracks often reminds audiences of specific moments from the film, showing just how successfully the soundtrack blended into the experience. Another fascinating part of White Chicks' legacy is the way audience appreciation kept growing long after critics had already delivered their opinions. This happens occasionally in cinema, but it's always interesting to watch play out. Initial reviews become only one chapter in a movie's story, while audience enthusiasm continues writing the rest. Through television broadcasts, DVD collections, streaming platforms, internet memes, and online discussions, the film gradually reached millions of additional viewers who judged it entirely on its own entertainment value. That steady growth helped transform it into a genuine cult favorite. If there's one lesson this movie demonstrates, it's that entertainment should never be underestimated. Not every successful film needs to redefine cinema or deliver profound philosophical ideas. Sometimes a movie succeeds simply because it gives audiences exactly what they hoped to experience. White Chicks embraces that philosophy without apology. It entertains, keeps the energy high, and creates memorable performances that people continue talking about decades later. That straightforward confidence has become one of its greatest strengths. As this review approaches its final chapters, my appreciation for the film has only grown stronger. While it certainly isn't a comedy designed for every individual taste, it's impossible to ignore the craftsmanship, dedication, and enthusiasm visible throughout the production. The fearless performances, polished technical work, memorable soundtrack, outstanding prosthetic makeup, and unwavering commitment to the central concept all combined to create a comedy that keeps finding new audiences year after year. Few films manage to build that kind of lasting relationship with viewers, and White Chicks has unquestionably earned its place among the most recognizable comedy classics of its era. After looking at White Chicks from so many different angles, I think the clearest conclusion is that this movie has accomplished something many comedies never manage. It has remained part of popular culture for more than 20 years. That's an achievement marketing alone can't explain. Marketing might convince people to watch a movie once, but only audiences can keep it alive for decades. The fact that White Chicks continues to be recommended between friends, quoted online, revisited during movie nights, and discovered by younger viewers says far more about its legacy than any opening weekend numbers ever could. One of the film's biggest strengths is that it never loses confidence in itself. From beginning to end, every department works toward the same goal. The writers fully embrace the outrageous premise. The director keeps the pacing fast. The actors commit completely to every scene. The makeup team makes the unbelievable feel believable. And the editors maintain a rhythm that rarely lets the comedy slow down. That unity is surprisingly rare, and many films contain strong individual elements that never quite come together. But White Chicks feels like a production where everyone understood exactly what kind of movie they were making. The performances remain the foundation of everything. Shawn and Marlon Wayans deserve enormous respect, because they never treat the concept like a joke.